very honored today that we get to host this conversation between Jed Perl and Sandy Royer on the occasion of the first biography of the great sculptor Alexander Calder, Jed Perl's book, which is titled Calder, The Conquest of Time, the Early Years, 1898 to 1940. And that book is available for sale here, and Jed will be signing copies after the conversation. Jed Perl is a regular contributor to the New York Review of Books. He was the art critic for the New Republic for 20 years. His previous books include Magicians and Charlatans, Antoine's Alphabet, and New Art City, which was a New York Times notable book and an Atlantic Book of the Year. He lives in New York City. Sandy Royer is founder and president of the Calder Foundation and grandson of the artist. Since 1987, Royer has documented more than 22,000 works by Calder and established an extensive archive dedicated to all aspects of the artist's career. He has curated and collaborated on over 100 Calder exhibitions worldwide, including projects at the Whitney Museum and the Tate Modern. He has published many texts on Calder's life and work, and he frequently lectures on the subject. So enjoy.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is a bit informal. Jed and I have come to know each other over the last 10 years while I've been writing this book.
9 years.
9 years that he's been writing this book. I like to pat a little. A dozen years we've known each other. This is how it goes with us when we do a chat. We just sort of rambling. Go ahead, ramble away. So I made a comment the other day about Jed's book, how it was a story, and Jed was offended that I called his biography a story.
I wasn't offended.
At the Whitney.
It is a story. I think it's a good story, actually.
It's a good story. Those of you who haven't read the book, which is all of you, you'll discover that Jed goes and discusses in great detail certain moments in my grandfather's life and in his career, and people that Calder knew and people that Calder didn't know. And he writes these stories and puts Calder in context. And it's become a firebrand now. Did you notice that?
Well, we've been talking a lot about, in the last few days, we've been talking, in the last few days as the reviews have begun to come out. It's been a fascination because it turns out that I've written a much less conventional book, a much more unconventional biography, a much more unconventional biography than I thought. Because one of the things I really, really wanted to do, which I think biographies and often biographies of imaginative artists do not do very well, is try to grapple with the whole question of the workings of the imagination. How does a genius arrive at certain things, certain solutions, certain forms? How does that happen? And of course, the workings of genius are almost by definition very difficult to track. They're mysterious, they're enigmatic. And one of the things I worked very hard on in this book was trying to look at what I almost think of as these kind of interlocking circles of influence or possible influence on the workings of Calder's mind. So when you confront something like the great enigma of how did this man become the essential kinetic artist of the 20th century, a lot of people will just mention that, well, a few people, Holy Menage, Duchamp, a few people had done a few kinetic things earlier, okay? So they sort of say, okay, you go from here to here, from A to B. But to me, that seems completely, utterly insufficient. So, just to use the whole question of Calder the kinetic as a case in point, I move from something as visceral, as physical with Calder, as Calder's fascination with movement. He was a terrible athlete, but he was very into athletics in college, even though he was something the laughing stock of a team. He really wanted to be out there moving. He was his whole life long an unconventional, sort of wild social dancer. He loved throwing himself across the dance floor, often with or without a woman.
Or a man.
Or a man. And in Paris, in the late 20s, people talked about him whizzing around on his bicycle. Okay. So there's that kind of visceral, immediate stuff, which I think is part somehow of how he arrives at this fascination, some obsession. There are many other things. But then I want to go to things as expansive, as metaphysically, you might say, as the enormous interest in dimensions beyond the third dimension. That was a kind of fascination among bohemians in the circles in which Calder moved in France in the 1920s and 30s. There was a Russian kind of nutty, mystic character named Uspensky, who wrote a book in which he talked about not only the fourth dimension, which some people think is time, some people think is space, but he talked about the fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth dimension. And as some of you, of course, know, Duchamp was interested in other dimensions. But there were also people, like there's a wonderful avant-garde English novelist named Mary Butts. Anybody here ever read Mary Butts' novel? She's kind of a cult figure. And she was actually the person who brought Jean Cocteau to see the circus in the 1920s. And Mary Butts, if you go to Mary Butts' journals, Mary Butts is always talking about the fourth dimension and being very interested in this stuff. And people have now taken me to task, or even those who have been taken me to task are sort of freaked out because I will, in talking about the whole question of Calder and the model, say, well, you know, I can't prove that Calder and Mary Butts talked about the fourth or fifth dimension, but I can show you that people Calder knew, and it was at parties with the set cafes, but we're very interested in that. And I would argue that for a genius, even if they didn't actually discuss it, this is part of the atmosphere, part of the sort of electricity in Paris that propels Calder forward and makes these things possible for him. And I just, I've been working on this book for 9 years, and I kind of love these little diversions and circlings around, and I'm very frank about saying, well, we don't know if there's anything, but I find it turns out this is very unusual. I hadn't realized how unusual it was.
Well, Mary Butts is a great example because you start to write about Aleister Crowley, and how Calder's relationship with Crowley is non-existent. But there's you set a stage for an understanding about things beyond the mundane, and that's Duchamp also said a line which we think is two-dimensional includes time. So time is not the fourth dimension, and you bring all these things up in your book in a way that is a much richer experience than just a linear description of his life.
I mean, another example, so it's like a different kind of thing, but also about making these connections. Calder met his wife to be Louisa James on a boat going back from France to America. And they're on the boat, and she had this short, curly hair. And within days of meeting her, he nicknamed her Medusa. And, a Freudian, you sort of look, if you're happy to be Freudian, you sort of look, God, this is the woman he's going to marry, the ancient Medusa, you turn men to stone, and you sort of think, what, this is bizarre. And what do you do with that? Okay. Well, I think there are many things to say about it. I think partly Calder was saying that Louise was a very strong personality. She was somebody formidable. But the other thing I discovered, I was reading, I just am kind of a random reader. There's a wonderful memoir of Paris in the 20s and 30s by a woman, an English sculptor, painter named Nina Hammond. It's a book called Laughing Tours. And in that book, she tells about bringing a beautiful opera singer to a lunch at the home of Calder, who, as it happens, is an artist called and she explains that this opera singer had this wonderful curly hair and was nicknamed Medusa. And then I think, maybe Medusa was a kind of nickname for women with curly hair at the time, who were sort of very independent-minded and self-possessed. So I tell this story, which, again, is sort of a diversion, but I love those kinds of diversions. I think it's fun.
At the beginning, you were talking almost like it was a psychological bunch of threads drawn together, but it's not so psychological. It's not from a psychological point of view. Your whole book, it sounded like you're headed down that direction. I just wanted to clarify because it's not some sort of analysis of all the psychology.
Too.
Yeah, a little bit.
I think there are things about his personality you understand better if you know his father. Calder's father was depressed, and was, of course, enormously well-known, I guess you could say famous sculptor in the first quarter of the 20th century in America. He was sort of a depressive sort of dude. And I think Calder took more out of after his mother, who was kind of let's get on with it person. I think it was in part he just had more of his mother's DNA in him, but I think he also feared his father's melancholy. And I think he sometimes, I think, almost programmatically would push through that. He wasn't going to go there because he'd seen how destructive it was. So, I guess I'm a kind of eclectic when it comes to how you approach a subject. I think that's, as a writer, I think one wants to have many tools in one's toolbox. One wants to be a formalist to some degree, one wants to be a psychologist, one wants to be an iconographer to some degree, one wants to be a sociologist to some degree. I think all of those things can come into play. For me, the fun of it is kind of try and weave it all together and make it also fun to read, make it exciting to read.
Well, the book is very exciting to read. It was very exciting for me to read in the various different versions that I've read, and the final great published version was really extraordinary. But I learned so many things about my family from your research and your writing. One of the most interesting things, I think, that I want to talk about is where did Calder come from? And most scholars in the last 50 years, and even 60 years, have written about Calder from this weird perspective of not really understanding what his origins are, and they just sort of make stuff up. And you've gone back and explained who his grandfather was, the famous sculptor, and who his father was, the famous sculptor, and his mother was a portrait painter, but really about the circle in which they lived, their association with all these famous artists of the time, and how radical they were. If you look back at Alexander Sterling Calder's sculpture, my grandfather's father's sculpture, it looks sort of old-fashioned today, it looks sort of academic. But in fact, in his day, he was making really overtly sexual sculpture. Many of them were overtly sexual and showed parts that you're not supposed to show. And he got into a lot of trouble for doing that. So you present my grandfather's development as a boy in the context of this surround. And then, of course, here in California, in the arts and crafts movement, the strength of this return to the handmade, the respect of the handmade as opposed to the mechanized.
Calder's father got tuberculosis in early 1905, 1906. The family ended up living in Pasadena for about 3 years. And I sort of started exploring this a little bit. And we always knew that either in 1909, right before leaving Pasadena or right after leaving Pasadena, Calder made 2 tiny little works in sheet metal, a dog and a duck, which he gave to his parents as Christmas presents. And these have always been very well known. One of them was shown the dog was shown in the 1943 retrospective Museum on Art, were very important to Calder. But I started to look at the Pasadena years and look at Pasadena, and I really hadn't known that much about this, but I realized it was something that's known to those who were interested in the social history of Southern California, the arts history. Pasadena was one of the world centers of the arts and crafts field. And indeed, Calder's parents knew all these people. In fact, a guy named Ted Bosley, who is the kind of green guy here, who's supposed to be here today, but has sore throat. I mean, Ted discovered, after we talked about this, in the Green papers, which are in Berkeley, Calder's mother's calling card. Okay? And then I started to realize that it was metalwork and working sheet metal was a huge thing here in Pasadena among arts and crafts people. And some of them were colleagues of Calder's father, who did work at the Troop at what became Caltech, which was the Troop Institute then. And I think it's actually possible that Calder, little Calder, young Calder, this brilliant young boy, got some tips or watched some of these arts and crafts people doing metalwork. And now that's interesting, but then you start to think about this. And I think the argument can be made that Calder's entire career, if you think of that great studio with all these metal things going on, you think of a man who does all these magnificent formal mobiles and does jewelry and does kitchen utensils. I think you could argue that Calder is the fulfillment in America, the greatest flower of that kind of seed or kernel that starts with the arts and crafts movement out here. And this was just something that kind of, came from by going really step by step. And seeing where things led.
So this is the first volume of your biographical exercise.
Yes.
Why did you decide it was in 1940?
Well, first I wanted it all to be one volume, partly because I had a sort of a serious reason for that, which is I think there's been a bifurcation in Calder, in understanding Calder between what people see as the avant-garde Calder of the 30s, and what people see as the sort of, what people who have questions about Calder see as the overly popular Calder of stadiums in front of banks or something. And I didn't like the idea of breaking into two laws. I wanted the whole arc. It then became obvious that there was much too much to fit into one volume. It's a heavy book to begin with, when it goes up to 1940. I felt that, a number of reasons, but the book volume one ends with a chapter called The Classical Style. I feel that by the end of the 30s, all the expressive possibilities that Calder would exercise in a dizzying array of different ways throughout his life, they were all kind of at his command by the end of the 30s. And what we think of as the classic Calder mobile, that tends to be sort of horizontal configuration with these shapes like this, those works begin to appear around 1940, though he returns to doing them at various points later as well. And so I close with this chapter, it seems like a nice place to end. And I should talk about the idea of classicism and classic style. I bring in Charles Rosen's great book about the classical style of music. And the other reason I thought it was good to end here is Volume 2 then begins with kind of double whammy. The beginning of World War II. And then almost all the people Calder's wife had been friends with in Europe, suddenly everybody's appearing in the States as emigres and exiles of one kind or another. So and they become the sort of receiving point for people because they speak French and they have this cosmopolitan. And then 3 years into the 40s, Calder has this great retrospective at the Museum of Modern Art, which is really one of these fulcrum turning points in his career, where he goes from being an artist very well known among the avant-garde to beginning to become this artist with this much broader reputation. The Museum of Modern Art shows such a success that it's extended the run as extended. Now that success does not really bear fruit in terms of sales and all that until into the 50s, probably because the war years kind of retard the kind of. But so it seemed like a natural place to write. And in a sense, the first volume is about telling us about things people know they didn't know. And I think the mission of volume 2 is really to remake what people think is the Calder they know as an unfamiliar figure. I hope volume 2 will show that Calder is much, first of all, remains a vanguardist, I think, in ways he has rarely been credited. I think he remains daringly experimental to the end. And I think because some of this stuff has become so familiar to us, so ubiquitous, these big abstract sculptures by him and other people, we don't realize that. We dare and pioneering role he played in the creation of the very idea of large-scale public sculpture. He really is key to that whole movement.
So I have a question for you as an author. I've never asked you this question. Do you ever read your books after they're published?
Yes.
Have you read the Calder book yet?
I read pages.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's sentences you agonize over and you think, oh, I'd like to rewrite, but everybody writes is like that.
Well, I think, a lot of artists in all different fields also don't read reviews.
Well, there's a whole question of whether people do or like George Balanchine said he never read reviews, but I think the conclusion is it's not true.
I know you read every review.
So far I have. But the other thing is, when I was a kid and I would read stories about writers I admired, great writers. George Eliot supposedly never looked at Middlemarch after it was published. And I would think, well, why? How could you not look at written a masterpiece? And why would you not look at it? And then when you are a writer, not that I've written anything like that. We're going from sublime to semi-ridiculous here, but you do understand that there, it's the process of writing that one loves. And I love writing until they're at the point where I can always remake it, I can reshape it, I can redo it. And I think, sometimes people don't go back to reading because, in a way, their involvement with it has ended, and a new involvement as the book's involvement with the world has begun. And I do think that's true. So, books have their fates, and you can't do anything about that once you're done.
We have a very interesting history together because my grandfather died in 1976, and I've had many people approach me to write a biography, and I found all of them to be insincere in the sense that one great famous biographer who's written many biographies even on artists approached me and said, well, it's time to write my own biography. And I said, well, why now? And she said, because there's a Calder show opening in 18 months. And I just laughed. It's just absurd to me. And I said, well, go write your book. But we can't be involved. So actually, Jed came along. Jed was commissioned to write a different book. I think it was, you could have chosen any artist you wanted to write about.
Yale University Press at some point had a series called American Icons. I think they did a book about hamburgers, and they came to me. They were very short. These little books, like out of 40,000 words. And they came to me, and I was sort of between things, and the money was good for what it was. I said the only thing I would do is Alexander Calder, and they said fine, and they wrote a contract. And I said, but I'm not signing the contract until I find out I had no idea it was a Calder family, it was a Calder foundation, I had no idea. So, I ended up meeting with this guy.
So he called up the foundation and said, I'd like to come meet Sandy Rower.
Yeah, he first ignored my first letter.
Well, that's normal. Just to make sure that
that's
it's sincere.
Right. So I came there, and he's showing me their phenomenal archive, which is one of the great archives of modernism, not just of Calder, but of modernism. And I can't get into the word edge.
That's not true.
And they finally go to his office, and I finally got a written answer to us. I said, well, are you going to stand in my way? I mean, we have to do this. He said, well, of course not, but why are you doing it?
I called that pocketbook, which he was really offended by. Why are you going to write this pocketbook? And remember? So, and then he said, why don't you do a big book? So, well, I proposed that you write a biography,
yeah.
and you thought that was curious. No, we both went and did investigations of each other, and I found out that he was a terrible, terrible guy, and was going to be horrible to work with.
And I was told that he was a terrible, terrible guy, and he was going to be horrible to work with. And then we had a drink at the Bellman's Bar in Carlisle, and confessed to each other, and we toasted. And that's... So,
and also, you know, this biography, people have asked me, is it an authorized biography? And I think only the person who is the subject can authorize a biography, but this is not an authorized biography. It's your book that you wrote. You had unlimited access
it's
to our
actually turned out to be incredible fun. I mean, I was very nervous even after I signed the contract. Because I told my editor at Conquest, I'm going to see how it goes for a year, and I may just leave if you know. I mean, it was a family. There's stuff. Calder's younger daughter, Sandy's mother, was. I never got to know her that well. She was quite sick by the time I started, and I got her. How many years ago? 6.5. Calder's older daughter, Sandra, I've gotten to know very well, and I was very nervous. You know, people say, Calder's wife were drunkards, and what do you say to somebody's daughter about that? Sandra's been extraordinary, extraordinary connecting with people, and Sandy's been extraordinary, and it's actually turned out to be huge fun because Sandy has the most incredible mind for very exact and specific things. I mean, you can describe the way two pieces of wire are attached on a wire figure sculpture from the 20s, and Sandy will call me up or text me and say, well, you know, Jed, it's not curved this way, it's curved that way. And I tend to have this I kind of like to go roaming. And I think we've actually affected one another's thinking in both ways, because he's pushed me to look at certain things close up. It's not my natural inclination. I've kind of insisted with him on looking at some of these other things. I think it's been that kind of mythical thing that people talk about, actual intellectual exchange, which has turned out to be, when in fact I started by being really worried about it. It's turned out to be really exciting to be focused on the same thing and in a sense of the same general goal, but to kind of come at it in different ways. And so, I mean, like, it's interesting, sometimes I'll like text him something in the middle of the night, or it's occurred to me, I think this is kind of a little bit off the deep end. I'm not sure where you go with this. I'll text him, he'll say, that's fantastic. I'll think, my God, if Sandy, who's like always very nitpicky, thinks it's okay, there's something there, I mean.
I text him right back in the middle of the night, too.
We don't sleep. So it's been, I mean, it's been kind of wild.
But I guess the point I want to make is that we have disagreements, and we continue to disagree. We don't agree about everything, and this is not some sort of book that I, told you what to do. It's your own book, which is an incredible, exciting, relieving thing for me. But there's still all these, we still have a lot of questions, even in book one. Did it happen this way? Did it happen that way? And you've written it at a certain kind of a point of view, which might be right or might be wrong. We'll probably never know.
I mean, it's kind of, my son jokes that I have a second family now, the Calder family. But it's actually, knowing the family, I think it's helped me in a way to know Calder. And you hear a lot of stories about artist heirs who are very,
Incompetent.
and self-destructive in a way, destructive of the artist. That way, I know it sounds like I'm destructive, but that's not it. It's sort of tradition of the Calder's wife were extremely liberal spirited. They were very active in the anti-war movement, and just there's certain strains of attitude, worldview that continue through the family, and continuing through multiple sort of generations of friendships, like with the Miros, and then friends with the great critic and curator James Johnson Sweeney, who did so much for Calder, who was also friends with James Joyce, and the Sweeney family continues to be friends with the Calder family. There's still a connection with the Sweeney family, with the Joyce family. So it's interesting how you kind of have this river of connections. Everybody's an individual, but that, again, in some way, talking about seeing these sort of circles within circles, that also is in a way helpful. And one of the things I realized is partly, I think, through talking to Sandra, Calder's daughter, Calder was often discussed as an American in Paris. An American in Paris. But what is I realized is Calder was not exactly American in Paris. First of all, a large percentage of people he knew in Paris were not Parisians. They were people from America, they were people from Spain, they were people from Eastern Europe, from Russia, from Italy, from Scandinavia. And Calder was part of an international kind of confederacy in a way of people. And it's an amazing thing now to look back on, especially in the age of Trump, with all this nativism that people are talking about so much now. Because the people Calder was close to, I'll take Miro as an example, they had very intense sense of feeling for their own native place, for Miro, Catalonia, for Calder, America. Calder never felt less than an American. But at the same time, that was completely consistent with, could be married to this sense of this international, really global possibility of connectedness. And it comes from family. Calder's parents had lived in Paris as artists before he was born. His older sister was born in Paris. She was called Peggy from Paris in the family. And his wife, Louisa, her father, who was a kind of quirky leftist when they met in the 30s, he spent a lot of time in Geneva. He was fascinated by the problems of the League of Nations. So this sort of international vision, it's like each of these people, Calder, Sandy, and Louisa, had grown up with this. And I think it's a very important thing to understand in politics. And this goes on into the second volume, where there are a lot of Calder involvements in South America. And of course, a lot of the artists and architects and collectors in South America, many of them were trained in Paris. And for the Calder's wife, this is just completely natural. Again, they love going to South America. They get very involved with samba when they're in Brazil. They love the particularity of places. But it's not either or. You don't have to be either Brazilian or an internationalist. These people are both. And they exalted in that. And I just love that. I mean, I think it's just a wonderful way to be. And also at this moment, there's all over Europe and here, there's such a rejection of that. And of course, they lived through that, that very primal rejection of that in the 30s. When authoritarianism became the Germans, the Italians. So it's a very moving thing, and I think you could even argue, and again, here you get into speculative, but if you think about the mobile and the idea of this thing with the elements in the mobile are connected in a specific way, and yet they have a free relationship as well. And I think in some large way, that is related to this sense of Calder and his wife and their friends as having their very particular qualities, but also moving freely with one another. It's a really very good thing.
One of the most exciting chapters for me is when Calder first becomes abstract. And it's something that is, art historians for the last long time have sort of glossed over this moment and start talking about the universe and the sun and the moon and the stars and the universe, and that's what Calder is trying to depict, which of course is completely wrong. And your chapter about volumes, vectors, densities, arrested motions, and so forth, the first exhibition of these abstract works in 1931 is really, really incredibly well written, because you describe how you describe them in kind of linear terms. You sort of describe objects, but then you relate them to this question of dimensionality beyond 3 dimensions, the third dimension. So it's. I guess my question is, what was it like to write that? Because you only had contemporaneous documents. You had Calder's own notes from 1931. You had the file on the exhibition in 1931. You had a little bit before, in October 1930, when it fully becomes abstract. But you didn't have 5 other books that people theorized about this moment. All that stuff was totally asked backwards. So, how did you get there?
Well, I think you swim away and then swim back. I think you, and I have to say, this is the part of the where I think you also were you wanted more and more and more, which was, I think, great too, because you kept kind of saying, "Come on, we can do," But I think it's this thing of moving from the very particular outward from it and back to it, and it's like you have to. My thing is, you can go as far afield as you want, just so long as when you then look at what you're finding far afield in relation to the particulars of the work, it makes sense. It still jogs, so that you don't want to go somewhere where somebody realizes it doesn't jog. Because what you're trying to do is grasp an imagination that makes leaps, okay? That takes in things, and I think genius is taking things. Sometimes they don't even know what they're taking, but they have this capacity, and then as just an ordinary guy trying to grasp this, you build out, and one of the things I try to do in the book is, sometimes there are places in the book where, I think it gets, there are pages that are demanding. I mean, they're demanding ideas that, give you a bit of a headache. And I try to move, as a writer, in and out of those things. Like, there's a chapter, I can't remember the chapter before he meets Louise on the boat. At the end, it gets very, I think I'm trying to talk about the idea of simplicity. And when Calder starts doing his wire figure sculptures, as this kind of amusing, funny, witty things, which they are. They're funny and witty and amusing, which is no small thing, okay? But he himself, and Calder's is sometimes a guy who backs his way into things, and he begins to realize, and he writes about this a little bit, it begins to dawn on him in the midst of a year or two of doing these wire sculptures, that there's more to it than he first thought. This is also something that happens to creative people. They do something, and then they react to what they've done, and they do something else. And then I'm trying to talk about this idea of simplicity. And there's a whole move toward Jean Cocteau. There's a whole idea about simplicity and distillation, and also it's connected with new classicism in the late 20s. And he called it and does his classical subjects, whether it was the Lion, Romulus and Remus, Printemps, Spring, is from Allegory Spring. And so I have all this stuff, and by the end of the chapter, it's like, and then I have to think about Satie, and this whole, it was sort of interesting. Satie also is one of those people who goes into simplicity, and there are very interesting connections between Satie and Calder. And then like by the end of that chapter, it's really interesting, but it's kind of like, whoa. And then so the next chapter begins with this really kind of juicy love story, you know, where he's on this boat and he meets this gorgeous woman who's like ready to kick up her heels and dance. And so it's like, I also want to give the reader a, you know, kind of take the reader on a path where we, in a way, sometimes we kind of get deep into the woods and then I'm like, okay, let's get back on the path for a while. And I think some of the reviewers so far have found that kind of unusual. Yes.
Well, it's non-spam.
Right.
And that's one of the things I didn't know was embarked on this adventure that you were only going to write one biography in your career, and it makes sense. But you're also a person who's reinventing yourself. You told me about some other biographies that sort of stylistically have a reference to this, but you've made a very strong statement in writing a biography that's very different than other biographies I've read.
Well, it's also like, I don't know if any of you know the literary critic Hugh Kenner. Does anybody know that name? Hugh Kenner wrote a book called The Pound Era, which is a book about Ezra Pound, which I absolutely adore, and it is the wackiest, weirdest book. It starts with, it's supposed to be a book about Ezra Pound, and it starts with some long anecdote about Henry James running into somebody on the street and what he said to her. And it's like, so it's kind of going in all these weird angles. It's kind of a cult book among people who are into Sir Pound and you know, Sir Pope, kind of you know, high modernist poetry. But I kind of brought things like that in as well as, I mean, I think this book is a good yarn in a way as well. And yeah, I do want to have that story. I mean, I think the Calder's Sandy and Louisa is just a great love story. And it's just incredibly happy marriage.
Well, let's see if they have any questions for you. We have some time for a few questions. I know some of you had some questions earlier. Lily's on microphone. You can just. Anyone have a question?
Joe.
I'm sure you made discoveries on this. Most of the books, and whether are historical or popular, talk about pretty male stalking in the family, especially in Philadelphia in this world. What discoveries did you make about
Well, I mean, one of the great discoveries about Annette Leonard Calder. Calder's mother, from a Jewish family. They were Bavarians. She was born in Milwaukee. Her father was very successful, ultimately in real estate in Milwaukee, and a sort of big shot in the Jewish community in Milwaukee. She had, art in her veins. Her father died when she was late teens, early 20s. She took her small inheritance against the advice of the brothers, went to Philadelphia and then Paris to be an artist. She was one of the founding members of a feminist art club in Philadelphia in the 1890s, when her first child, Olga, was already born. She's actually most of the women who founded this thing were not married. I mean, she was, this is something nobody had known. It's a place, a club called the Plastic Club, which still exists. The idea of the day being that plastic is malleable, or plasticity, the idea of plasticity of changeable, is obviously, these were women. They were very pissed off at the fact that the Charcoal Club, which was a men's club, art club in Philadelphia, they wanted to have their own club. She was a formidable painter in the sort of painterly manner of the Ashcan school. She was like her husband. She was close to people like John Sloan, Robert Enright. John Sloan was a great admirer of her and took her very, very seriously. She showed a little bit early in her son's life. She was close to some artists who were much more successful than she was. It was very, very tough for a woman starting out at that point. If you wanted to get married and have children, it was very, very hard to continue it. She had a close friend who was a very well-known illustrator in the last years of the 19th century, who then married and had a child, and basically her career, she married an engineer, and her career ended. And Nanette called her to the end of her life. I mean, in the book there expressed frustration at how things had gone for her. So there is that whole, I mean, there's a fascinating story there. And in many ways, Calder was more like his mother in terms of, I mean, he kind of has a kind of Jewish, a certain kind of Jewish-driven, you know, just what the hell, let's get on with the quality that comes from his mother. And interestingly, Sandra, the older daughter, tells me that when his mother died, his mother lived to be very old, she lived in her 90s, and lived with them in her later years. And there were, you know, conflicts, you know, son and mother, and she would sometimes make comments like, you know, well, your father was a more important artist than you are, but when she died, Calder, totally atypically, apparently, went to bed for 3 hours, which for a guy like Calder is a very talented thing. So she's really an interesting part of the story. And when I discovered this connection with plastic Calder, in the book there are wonderful photographs of Calder and his sister as kids, done by these photographs were anonymous when I arrived at the foundation. They turned out to have been done by a woman named Eva Watson-Schultz. Those of you who know about the American pictorialist movement, she was a photographer much admired by Stieglitz. And she was a close friend of Nanette Calder and another founder of this plastic club. So that's a whole other. She did. She painted until into sometime in her 80s. And he was also, I mean, Calder became a painter before he became a sculptor. And then, interestingly, when he becomes an abstract artist, he starts painting before, I mean, he first does paintings. And I mean, and that's sort of interesting. And in fact, when he's actually living in the Pacific Northwest, but kind of gives up on engineering, and he writes to his mother sends him paintings. So it's really it's a wonderful story.
There was another question back there.
Hi, thank you. Way earlier in the talk, I think I interpreted as you investigated where ideas come from, you know, the influences that he was in and around. So were there any key findings, you know, was there audio influence or visual influence or literary influence, you know, across, you know, that were like maybe key inflection points that drove some of these trajectories for him?
Well, again,
let me give a preamble to your answer. So one of the things that Jed did was he went to the family house, which is the Calder's house. They bought this house in 1933. It's an old farmhouse from 1760 in the Connecticut hillside, with dairyland. And Jed went through every single book in the house and looked at every page and found inscriptions in the books, so he could tell that this was Nanette Lederer's before she was married, because it doesn't say Nanette Lederer Calder, it says Nanette Lederer, and could place the book, whose book it was, what its significance was. And it was very, very interesting. He was there for a couple of days in the house going through all the books. It was a very interesting exercise.
I mean, I don't think you can point, I would never want to point to one thing, but let me give an example. Everybody's known that Calder was friends with the composer Varese, Edvard Varese. Okay? But nobody had really looked at Varese's writings in relation to Calder. One of the things I've come to feel about art historians is they're very, by and large, there are exceptions, but by and large, they're on this art history thing. They don't look at, you know, an artist is friends with a literary person or a musician. They don't really explore what the literary person has said or what the musician said. So you start reading Varese's writings, and he talks about like sounds having these kind of relationships, different sounds kind of interacting in space. And it sounds like a kind of description of a mobile only in oral rather than visual terms. Now, now Perez and Calder were quite close at the moment, really, of the gestation of the idea of the mobile. So again, I wouldn't, I'm not going to land on that as the one thing, but that gives you a sense of a kind of shared community of ideas. Or for instance, there's a critic named Carl Einstein, who's a very important critic in the 20s and 30s, very close friends with Rock. Carl Einstein was at a very important performance in the circus in 30. I don't know if it's, I guess we don't know if it's the night Mojo came or not. But Carl Einstein, in the early 30s, had this idea of nomadism in the arts. He was very interested in Etruscans and the kind of silk route art. There's art that was made by people who weren't specifically tied to one place. And this idea of nomadism, I think, was actually connected with this idea emerges in the early 30s. Carl Einstein is a German guy living in Paris. It's a time when a lot of artists are sort of looking for a place, a home, And again, I mean, this brings back to something I said about the mobile. We think about mobile as the forms are nomadic, and you think that back to Calder. Calder's father did these monuments. He did one of the sculptures of George Washington, the Arch of Washington Square Park. It is there. It stays where it is. And the mobile, again, the idea of nomadism is another kind of color we can put on it that I think helps us understand. Again, I wouldn't hang the whole thing on. I wouldn't say mobiles are about exile or immigration. That would be ridiculous. But it's an element. So that was the kind of process I went through.
There are some stories, and widely misinterpreted stories. A famous story about Calder arriving to visit the studio of Pete Mondrian, and Calder wrote about that a few times in his life. And you have to read his notation to understand the kind of bigger picture of what the event was. Many people have interpreted what he wrote to mean Calder was inspired by Mondrian's paintings, which is not what Calder wrote. Calder wrote that he went to visit, he already knew Mondrian's paintings, but he went to visit the studio, and the way the studio was organized was a little dark bedroom and a stairway, a little narrow stairway going up, and a door that actually led to the building next door. And you open that door, and you this sort of tall height and a half space with light coming in from two directions, and that was the studio, where everything in the room had a rigorous purpose. Everything had its position. That the pipe in the ashtray was turned so you saw its profile when you approached from the door. Every single thing had a significance. Not a mathematical significance, but an emotional significance. And my grandfather's response to this place was sort of euphoric, that this space could exist rather like a work of art. This is way before installation art, right? But he saw it as kind of a unified space. And that was the thing that really shocked him, that all those things could unite together and have a singular experience from it.
And there's, one of the things also, one of the words he uses, Calder uses in one of his descriptions, he said, then I could feel abstract art. And this is the case of, I think it's very important, very closely with the words, because one of the mysteries is, well, if he was familiar with abstract art, why didn't he just become abstract a few years earlier? And my conclusion is this is a man who, he had to feel something before he would do it. And I think the fact that he leapt into abstraction then with such ease and grace in the first show of abstract sculpture, it's like, there's nothing of the apprentice about it. It's completely, he's fully in command. And I think that's probably because he looked at a lot of things before, but he couldn't, what he was saying was he couldn't feel the pressure of the abstract. And he said somewhere wonderfully that the visit of Mondrian Studio was like the slap you give the baby when the baby's born to get it going, which is, again, a very interesting metaphor, saying, the baby doesn't, it's not the slap that makes the baby capable of breathing, but the slap gets it going. Okay, so he's saying, I had this in me, but this is the thing that got going. So I think these are cases where it's really important, and this is also something you're very exactly about, really looking at the words, and what what actually is said and not said, and kind of making those distinctions, which is really important.
Another couple of questions?
What surprised you about the review so far?
I think people find the book very unusual as a biography that's kind of circling around and diverting and going at angles. And the interesting thing is both people who've been positive about the book and people who are negative about it, they kind of point to that same thing, is this kind of issue. And I guess after these years of writing, I thought it was more normative than I guess it's turning out to be. What?
It's
It's
applicable.
applicable.
What's the most negative reaction?
I mean, Hauser Wirth, your book.
No. The most negative reaction was really funny. This gentleman who wrote an essay about Calder before, and from the point of view of engineering, was very frustrated that Jed didn't describe how engineering played this giant role in Calder's work. And in fact, Calder said himself, had he not studied engineering, he still would have made mobiles. There's this whole misconception about what engineering is, and Jed's written it really well, why he went to engineering school, what that was about, how he was already an innate child engineer. He had all these, as you know, had all these sensibilities that allowed him to go into mechanical engineering studies. But so that one, did you read that?
That was ironically or positive. It's by this guy whose name Trust. The guy who wrote
It's very positive.
called The Pencil,
Yeah.
which is a sort of celebrated quirky book, but he's not.
But it's only when he's saying that you can do
Well,
that.
I don't. It's like people ride their hobby horses, whatever. I mean,
Have you been reading the book the whole time?
I'm just feeling.
it's just,
Looking at
whatever.
pictures, looking and listening.
I mean, I think the engineering, there was something sort of wonderfully serendipitous as time went on about certain things about engineering, and way more in the second volume. In the later years when Calder does these enormous works where he'll do, a small version, and then there are actually questions about how things would interact with wind, and, how we would take something this big and make it 70 feet high. And he is familiar with, and then he's working literally with engineers, and this is fun work for him because it's kind of, everything comes back, you know what I mean, these things, and he knows the languages and all this stuff. He actually went through the same training, so it's not that he couldn't have done it without that, but it's kind of wonderful. And it just, I say in the book that I think the experience of Stevens Institute of Technology came to function for him a little the way a Renaissance or Baroque manual of painting functioned for a painter, where a painter, Leonardo would look and say, well, how do I grind this, or what's the property of this color? He looked at that, and Calder kind of, from his training, had how do different metals interact with heat, for instance. These were things that he'd actually studied. So as certain things came up at certain times, Vanessa was skeptical.
Seems important.
Yeah, right.
But I want to point out that, so Calder also made jewelry. Many of you know his jewelry. He made 1,800 pieces of unique jewelry, necklaces, these elaborate things, smaller things. And he didn't use heat, which the studio art jewelers are so confused and perplexed how Calder didn't use heat to help him in his hammering process. He didn't cast, he hammered wire into forms. And he would hammer it to the extent that it could tolerate, and if he went any further, it would break because it got too hard. And if he used a torch to anneal the wire, you could continue to hammer it. But he didn't use a torch. He absolutely refused to use a torch. He just wanted to push the molecular structure as far as it could go. But he could have used a torch from his studies in engineering.
Well, there's a whole, people tend to think that welding is a big part of Calder, which it isn't. And I have a whole thing about this, which is interesting. There are certain cases of things being welded, but by and large, they're not. The separate pieces are attached in a whole variety of different ways. And I actually think this is an interesting thing. I think there's your welding and heat is connected with a sort of idea of this complete transformation of one thing into another. And I think the idea that things are brought together with the I think, again, I think there's something there to his kind of thinking, the interest in likeness. I mean, even these monster things, Hughes is the thing in Montreal, these things were put together with bolts in France, taken apart, shipped, and then put together again with bolts. I mean, he liked the idea of that. Again, there would be many explanations for why he liked that, but he valued that. It's connected with this. Somehow heat, I think in some deep, profound way, which we could maybe never quite fathom, it didn't appeal to them. I think it was a violence about it, maybe.
Well, it's actually, there was also a question of alchemy for him.
Yes.
About heat and transformation.
Right, exactly.
And his transformation was the combination of things by his own will, not using one of the elements.
And the idea that they become apart again, I think, it's part of the light. I mean, lightness. This is a man who was heavy, overweight, who was very light on his feet. I mean, people, he was, and I think that there's something about lightness that's very, very important.
You have a question?
Can I be heard? Use this. I've been spending a lot of time again with John Richardson's Picasso biography. And just one of the things that jumps out at you immediately with that project is the claim of the author to have known Picasso in later years of his life. So you've not made that claim, I'm assuming that you never heard it. But I am wondering what your relationship with Calder was like before you did this biography project, and what it's like now,
Well,
after.
I have always said, I mean, when people ask, I said, well, the only person I can conceive of doing a biography of is Calder.
Why would that be?
Well, there were, I think, two big reasons. One is I'm very interested, I love the work to begin. I'm very interested in these art worlds on both sides of the Atlantic, the Parisian,